Wake up! Liam! A cold, mechanical voice dragged me out of the darkness. My eyes snapped open, but the blinding white lights of the hospital room sent a sharp, throbbing pain straight through my skull. My head was wrapped in heavy bandages, smelling of antiseptic and burnt flesh. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry like sand. Standing at the foot of my bed was Victor, my wife's personal assistant, checking his watch with a look of pure annoyance. "You are finally awake," Victor said, his voice flat and entirely empty of concern. "Sienna is busy. She went to Christian Knight's grand opening tonight. She said not to disturb her with your little kitchen accidents." I stared at him, my mind spinning. I was 27, but my memories, they stopped at 20. I had no idea who Sienna was, why we were married, or why my hands were covered in severe burns. Victor did not wait for me to process his words. He reached into his sleek leather briefcase and tossed a black credit card onto the bedside table. The plastic clinked against the metal tray, a cold, metallic sound that echoed in the silent room. "Sienna was furious," Victor continued, adjusting his tie with a smirk. "You ruined the VIP dinner service. The kitchen fire caused a panic, and she had to spend the evening apologizing to the investors. You really chose the worst time to make a mistake, Liam." He spoke as if my life-threatening accident was nothing more than an inconvenient spill. The utter lack of empathy in his voice was chilling. I looked at the black card, my bandaged fingers trembling. I did not know this woman he called my wife, but her name sent a strange, cold shiver down my spine. The penthouse where we supposedly lived felt light years away from this reality. I felt like an intruder in a life I couldn't remember, surrounded by people who only saw me as a tool. Before I could ask a single question, the door clicked open and the doctor entered the room. He held a clipboard, his face grim as he looked at my charts. He explained my condition in dry, clinical terms. "You suffered a severe blow to the head during the grease fire," the doctor said, pointing to the bandages. "It has caused retrograde amnesia. The last 7 years of your life, they are gone." I tried to search my mind, but there was only a massive, dark void. I remembered my grandfather's old kitchen, the smell of roasted garlic, the warmth of the wood stove, but everything after my 20th birthday was a complete blank. I was a stranger in my own body, married to a woman who had not even bothered to visit me. The doctor explained that my physical wounds would heal, but the puzzle of my lost years remained unsolved, leaving a deep hollow ache in my chest. The nurse checked my vitals silently, her eyes full of pity. As soon as the doctor stepped out to fetch my prescription, Victor leaned in closer. The smell of his expensive cologne was suffocating. "Let's be clear, Liam," he whispered, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "You are a liability now. Sienna's father, Arthur, has a lot of money riding on the upcoming merger. He cannot have an unstable chef ruining their reputation. Here is a waiver. You sign it, you take this credit card, and you keep your mouth shut about the flagship kitchen. If you try to complain to Sienna, or if you tell anyone about the safety issues, we will ruin you." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. I hid the paper under my pillow, staying silent. I would not sign it, but I would not tell Sienna either, because I did not know who to trust. The threat hung in the air, a silent warning that my forgotten life was surrounded by dangerous enemies. They wanted to buy my silence before I even knew what I was silencing. Left alone in the quiet hospital room, I looked out the rain-slicked window. The metropolis was a blur of neon lights and dark, towering buildings. The smell of smoke still lingered in my hair, a constant reminder of the fire that had almost killed me. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing down on my chest. I could not stay in this place, waiting for strangers to decide my fate. I reached over, my fingers raw and blistered, and yanked the 4-tube out of my arm. A sharp prick of pain registered, followed by a drop of warm blood. I slid out of the bed, the cold floor sending a jolt through my bare feet. I had to find out who I was, and why I had been turned into a ghost by the woman who claimed to love me. I would not let them keep me caged in this room like a wounded animal. I dressed slowly in my torn clothes and slipped out. I discharged myself against medical advice, walking out into the cold night air. The taxi dropped me off at a towering, high-security penthouse in the city's wealthiest district. The address was written on the notepad Victor had left behind. The security guard in the lobby stared at me with a mixture of recognition and subtle disgust. He scanned my keycard without saying a word, letting me into the private elevator. As the elevator shot upward, my ears popped, and the silence inside the mirrored cabin felt suffocating. I stepped out into a massive, open-concept penthouse. The walls were painted in sterile shades of gray and white, decorated with expensive, abstract art. It did not look like a home, it looked like a gallery designed to impress strangers. Every surface was polished, cold, and completely empty of any human touch or warmth. I felt like a ghost walking through an expensive tomb. I wandered through the empty rooms, my footsteps echoing on the polished marble floors. There were no personal photographs on the shelves. No warmth, no traces of a shared life. I eventually found a private study at the end of the hallway. The desk was made of dark, heavy mahogany, and on the shelves stood a row of leather-bound journals. I pulled one down, my bandaged hands clumsy. I opened the cover, and my heart skipped a beat. The neat, precise handwriting inside was unmistakably mine. The pages were filled with complex chemical equations, fermentation charts, temperature graphs, and highly detailed master recipes. I was indeed a chef, and according to these pages, a genius one. I could feel a faint spark of memory in my fingertips as I touched the ink, a ghost of my former passion. I spent hours reading, realizing the depth of my own talent. As I flipped through the journals, a folded document fell out from between the pages. I picked it up and read the header, Cooperation Agreement between Arthur Carter and Christian Knight. My eyes scanned the lines, and the blood in my veins turned to ice. The document outlined a plan to launch a global restaurant franchise called Knight's Heritage. The core of the entire franchise was my secret fermentation base, a formula my grandfather had passed down to me. But my name was nowhere on the contract. Arthur Carter, my father-in-law, and Christian Knight, the celebrity chef, were planning to patent my formula under Christian's name. I was being used as a silent ghost, locked in a kitchen to produce their wealth while they took all the credit. They had built their entire empire on my silence, exploiting my amnesia and my quiet nature to steal my legacy. I dug deeper into the desk drawers, searching for any explanation. In the back of a bottom drawer, I found my personal diary entries from the past year. The handwriting in these entries was different, shaky, erratic, and small. Sienna says I must stay in the background, I read aloud, my voice sounding hollow in the empty room. She says my face does not fit the brand. She says her father will destroy my grandfather's old vaults if I do not give them the recipes. I must do it. I must keep her happy. I must protect her. The words read like the desperate pleas of a man who had lost his mind, or had his mind taken from him. A deep, quiet anger began to boil beneath my skin, burning away the confusion. I realized I had been a pawn in a game I no longer wanted to play. I was chemically and emotionally chained to this family. The penthouse was a cage, and I had been the willing prisoner. The realization that my marriage was built on exploitation and silence was a bitter pill to swallow. I closed the journals, stacking them neatly on the desk. The amnesia had wiped away the last 7 years, but in doing so, it had also wiped away my fear and my submissiveness. I was no longer the weak, compliant man who wrote those desperate entries. I was 27, but my mind was now the sharp, unyielding mind of a 20-year-old who loved the kitchen and feared no one. I heard the lock of the penthouse front door click open. Sienna was home, and I was ready to face her with a cold, unbending resolve. I would not hide in the shadows any longer. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Sienna Carter stepped into the penthouse. She was wearing a stunning black designer dress that clung to her slender frame, her long, wavy golden blonde hair cascading over her shoulders. Her sapphire blue eyes were bright, but her face was pale, showing signs of exhaustion. She stopped mid-step when she saw me sitting at the kitchen island in the dark. A flash of surprise crossed her elegant features, quickly replaced by a cold, familiar mask of annoyance. "Why are you out of the hospital?" Sienna asked, her voice sharp and demanding. "You embarrassed me today, Liam." My father had to spend hours explaining to the investors why our flagship kitchen caught fire. "You really chose the worst night to be careless. Do you have any idea how much money we lost because of that fire?" I remained completely still, watching her. I looked for any sign of worry, any hint of relief that I had survived the fire, but there was none. "I lost my memory," I said, my voice flat and calm. Sienna let out a short, bitter laugh as she tossed her diamond-encrusted clutch onto the counter. "Oh, please. Is this another one of your silent protests? I don't have the time or the energy for your dramatics tonight, Liam. The opening of Christian's restaurant was a massive success, and we need to capitalize on it. I need you back in the kitchen tomorrow. We have a reputation to maintain, and my father is already losing his patience with you. Don't make things harder for us." She spoke to me like an employer demanding a lazy worker return to their shift. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the gold wedding ring. I dropped it into a glass of tap water sitting on the counter. The metal clinked against the glass, a clear, sharp sound that seemed to shatter the silence of the room. The ring sank slowly to the bottom, resting under the cold water. Sienna stared at the glass, her breath catching in her throat. "What is the meaning of this?" she whispered, her voice losing its sharp edge. I slid a folder across the marble counter toward her. It contained the divorce papers I had found in the study, already signed by my hand. "I am leaving, Sienna," I said, looking directly into her sapphire eyes. "We are done. I am divorcing you. I will no longer be your shadow. I will no longer live as a ghost." Sienna's cold facade cracked completely. For a brief second, I saw a flash of pure terror in her eyes, a desperation so raw it surprised me. She took a step forward, her hands trembling. "You can't leave," she said, her voice rising. "You signed the exclusivity contracts with the Carter Group. You belong in our kitchens. If you walk out now, my father will." She cut herself off, biting her lip as she realized she had said too much. I stood up, my taller frame throwing a long shadow over her. "A ghost cannot sign a contract, Sienna," I said, my voice cold as ice. "And I am tired of being dead. Find someone else to steal recipes from. I am taking my life back, and you cannot stop me. The contract is worthless without my mind." She reached out to grab my arm, her fingers brushing against my bandaged wrist, but I pulled away before she could make contact. "Liam, please. You don't understand," she cried, her voice cracking. But I did not want to understand. I walked past her, my boots echoing on the marble floor. I did not look back as I opened the front door and stepped out of the penthouse. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, severing the last link to the life I had forgotten. I walked out into the cool night, feeling the rain on my face. For the first time in 7 years, I was free, and I was ready to build my own path. I would never let anyone make me a ghost again, and I would never return to this golden cage. The next morning, I took the train to the Old Harbor District. It was a modest, working-class neighborhood where the streets were made of worn cobblestones and steam rose from the metal manholes. The air here was thick with the smell of salt, diesel, and cheap food, but it felt alive, unlike the sterile penthouse. I found a small, vacant diner with a sign that read "For Lease." It had only 4 wooden tables, a rusted counter, and a small kitchen visible through a hatch. The landlord, an old man with calloused hands, looked at me with curiosity. I paid the first 3 months of rent in cash using the money I had withdrawn from my personal savings account, which they had not yet frozen. It was a humble start, but it was mine, and it smelled of reality. As soon as the keys were in my hand, I made a phone call. I called the landlord of the flagship kitchen of the Carter Culinary Group. Because I had designed the space, my grandfather's trust had insisted that the lease be under my personal name. I informed the landlord that I was legally terminating the lease immediately, citing the safety violations and the grease fire that the management had failed to prevent. The landlord was shocked, but the contract was ironclad. Without my lease, the flagship restaurant could not legally operate. Within hours, the Carter Culinary Group was forced to lock its doors, halting their operations. It was the first strike, and it hit them right where it hurt. The foundation of their empire was beginning to crack under the weight of my departure. I spent the next 3 days scrubbing the diner from top to bottom. I polished the old copper pots until they shone like new, cleaned the black grease off the grill, and repaired the squeaky wooden chairs. The physical labor was exhausting, but it helped clear my mind. My hands were still bandaged, but the pain had subsided to a dull ache. On the 4th day, I began the most important task, preparing my grandfather's heirloom fermentation base. I mixed the cooked soybeans, toasted barley, and wild plums in a large clay crock, sealing it with a thick cloth. The familiar, deep aroma filled the tiny diner, grounding me in my past. It was the smell of my childhood, pure and untarnished, a connection to who I really was. The diner opened without any grand announcements or advertisements. I hung a simple blackboard by the door with a menu written in chalk: beef broth with fermented plum, slow-roasted pork belly, and pickled mustard greens. There were no reservations, no VIP sections, and no press. The first customer was a local dock worker who stumbled in seeking shelter from the rain. He took a spoonful of the broth, and his eyes widened. He did not say a word, he just ate in silence, scraping the bowl clean. By the end of the day, all 4 tables were filled with locals who had heard about the mysterious new diner from their neighbors. The simple, honest food spoke for itself, carrying a depth of flavor they had never experienced. As I washed the dishes at the end of the night, I looked out at the empty dining room. The simple joy of feeding people was something I had forgotten, but now it felt like a lifeline. The Carter Group had built their empire on my back, but I would show them that the genius was not in their brand, it was in my hands. The flagship restaurant was closed, their stocks were starting to slide, and the investors were getting nervous. I knew Arthur Carter would not sit idle, but I was ready for whatever they planned to throw at me. This small diner was my fortress, and I would defend it with everything I had. The battle had begun, and I was cooking my way to victory. The constant brain fog that had plagued me in the hospital had started to lift completely since I stopped taking the stress relief vitamins that the Carter family doctor had prescribed. My thoughts were sharper, my reaction times faster, and my palate more sensitive than ever. To confirm my suspicions, I visited a private, independent clinic located in the outskirts of the metropolis. The office was small and clean, with sterile blue chairs and the quiet hum of an air conditioner. I requested a comprehensive toxicological blood screening, paying in cash and using a false name to ensure the results would not be intercepted by Arthur's extensive connections. The wait for the results was agonizing, but I kept myself busy in the diner kitchen, refining my recipes and serving the growing crowd of customers who lined up daily. 2 days later, I returned to the clinic. The doctor, a serious man with thin metal glasses who did not ask unnecessary questions, handed me a printed lab report. "We found high concentrations of a prescription-strength cognitive blocker and mild sedative in your blood," the doctor said, pointing to the chemical names on the sheet with a plastic pen. "If taken daily, this substance would cause chronic memory issues, confusion, and extreme compliance. It essentially dulls your brain's executive functions. Have you been taking any new medications recently?" I stared at the paper, my knuckles turning white as I gripped the edge of the desk. The truth was worse than I had imagined. They had systematically kept me drugged to keep me quiet, ensuring I would never claim my own legacy. I felt a wave of cold fury wash over me, settling in my chest. The Carter family had not just exploited my talent, they had chemically lobotomized me. They kept me in a constant state of submissive confusion to ensure I would never question their decisions or try to claim my patents. Sienna's doctor, the man who had checked on me every week, was the one prescribing these pills. I felt a wave of nausea, followed by a cold, burning rage. The amnesia from the fire was indeed a miracle. By wiping my short-term memory, it had forced me into the hospital where I stopped taking the sedatives. The poison was leaving my system, and my true mind was finally returning. I was waking up from a 7-year nightmare, and the fog was entirely gone. I remembered my name, my purpose, and my cooking. I was no longer their compliant puppet. I walked back to my diner in a daze, the lab report clutched tightly in my coat pocket. I went straight to the kitchen and pulled the remaining pill bottles out of my bag. I stared at the small, white capsules. They were the chains that had bound me to Sienna and her father for years, keeping me locked in a prison of my own mind. I opened the door of the wood-fired oven, watching the orange flames lick the iron walls. One by one, I tossed the bottles into the fire. The plastic melted and bubbled, releasing a thin stream of black, acrid smoke that was quickly sucked up the chimney. "They wanted a ghost," I whispered to the empty room. "But they are about to face a nightmare. I will reclaim my mind, my name, and my recipes. They will pay for every single pill they forced down my throat." That evening, the diner was packed. The line stretched out the door and onto the wet pavement. I cooked with a speed and precision I had never felt before. I could smell the exact moment the onions caramelized, feel the perfect temperature of the oil, and balance the spices with absolute certainty. My amnesia was still there, the last 7 years were still a darkroom, but my culinary genius was fully awake. I did not need my memories to know how to cook, it was written in my muscles and my soul. The Carters thought they had broken me, but they had only stripped away my chains. I was no longer their victim, I was their reckoning, and my kitchen was my arena. I plated the dishes with a quiet, intense focus, ready to show the city what a free man could do. The next morning, I was prepping fresh scallions at the wooden counter when the old tube television screen hanging in the corner of the diner buzzed to life. A local news broadcast came on, showing a live press conference. Arthur Carter, his thinning silver hair slicked back and his face tight with forced confidence, stood at a podium. Beside him stood celebrity chef Christian Knight, wearing a tailored white chef coat, and Sienna, who looked stunning but incredibly pale. "We are thrilled to announce," Arthur said into the microphones, "the official merger of the Carter Group and Knight's Culinary. To celebrate this union, Sienna Carter and Christian Knight are now officially engaged. This partnership will launch a global culinary franchise." The camera lights flashed continuously, illuminating their faces. I watched her hand resting in his, feeling absolutely nothing. It was just a corporate transaction. I stopped chopping, the heavy knife hovering just above the cutting board. On the screen, Christian smiled arrogantly, placing a possessive hand on Sienna's waist. Sienna smiled for the cameras, but her eyes were glassy and lifeless. The news anchor explained that this merger would launch a global franchise using Christian's newly patented heritage fermentation base. The announcement was a transparent corporate move to stabilize the Carter Group's tanking stock prices after I terminated the flagship kitchen's lease. They were trying to reassure the investors that everything was under control, even if they had to fabricate an engagement to do it. The desperation in their move was obvious, a desperate attempt to patch a sinking ship before it went under. They were selling her future to save their corporate name, but they had no idea that their foundation was completely hollow. I watched the broadcast, expecting to feel a pang of jealousy or anger. But as I stared at Sienna's face on the screen, I felt absolutely nothing. The amnesia had washed away my emotional attachment, and the medical revelation had destroyed any lingering pity. She was no longer my wife, she was a stranger who had stood by while her family drugged me and stole my legacy. I turned back to the cutting board, the heavy knife coming down with a sharp, rhythmic click. I did not care about her fake engagement. My only focus was the food in front of me. They could play their corporate games, but I would play mine on the plates. I would let my cooking do the talking, and I would make sure they heard every word. The old tube television hummed as I switched it off, plunging the corner back into silence. Meanwhile, in a parallel street, Sienna's search for me had taken a desperate turn. After realizing I had vanished from the penthouse, she had gone to my old apartment, hoping to find some trace of where I had gone. The apartment door was opened by a stranger, a young student who had recently moved in. Liam? Oh, the previous tenant, the student said, leaning against the doorframe. Yeah, he cleared out everything last week. He didn't leave a single thing behind. He actually rented a huge dumpster and threw away every single book, photo, and letter. He said he wanted to erase his past completely. It was kind of creepy, honestly. He didn't want any memories left behind, not even a scrap of paper. He just wanted to disappear. It was like he never lived here, not even a single photo remained. Hearing this, Sienna felt a cold hand grip her heart. She stood on the dusty landing, her breath coming in short, panicky gasps. She realized that I had not just walked out of the penthouse, I had systematically erased every single memory of our life together. She had tried to protect me from her father by keeping me hidden, but her silence had pushed me to the brink of self-destruction. Now, she was trapped in a fake engagement with a man she despised, while the husband she secretly loved had disappeared without leaving a single trace. The realization of her failure was suffocating, and the walls of her empire felt like they were closing in on her. She walked back to her luxury car in silence, tears spilling down her cheeks as she realized she had lost me forever, and there was no turning back. It was late Tuesday evening, and the rain was tapping softly against the diner windows. The last customers had left, leaving the small dining room quiet and peaceful. I was wiping down the wooden tables when the bell above the door chimed. I looked up, expecting a late traveler, but instead, a young woman stepped inside. She had a short, auburn bob and soft green eyes, and she was shivering in a wet coat. It was Lily, Sienna's 20-year-old sister. She looked around the humble diner, her eyes wide with a mixture of guilt and sadness. Liam, she whispered, her voice trembling. I found you. I need to talk to you. Please, don't turn me away. I need to tell you the truth about everything. Sienna is not who you think she is. She was trying to help you from the very start. I did not answer immediately. I walked behind the counter and poured a bowl of hot vegetable broth, sliding it toward her. Sit down, Lily, I said calmly. She took a seat on the wooden stool, wrapping her cold hands around the warm bowl. A tear escaped her eye and fell into the broth. I am so sorry, Liam, she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. We treated you like a ghost, but you were the one holding us together. My father, he is a monster. He forced Sienna into that engagement with Christian. He threatened to destroy everything if she didn't comply. She is miserable, Liam. She cries herself to sleep every night in that empty penthouse, staring at the spot where your things used to be. She is trapped just like you were, in a prison of my father's making, and she has no way out. Lily began to explain the truth behind the double misunderstanding. Sienna's cold, distant exterior was not born out of disgust or arrogance, as I had believed. She was secretly trying to protect me. Her father, Arthur, had discovered my genius formulas and wanted to take them by force. Sienna knew that if Arthur realized my true value, he would use his legal team to seize my patents and discard me. She kept me hidden in the background, acting cold to convince her father that I was nothing more than a simple husband who had no real talent. She was trying to buy time to buy out the contracts and set us free, taking all the emotional pain onto herself while keeping me in the dark about her plan to save my work. She went to Christian's opening because Arthur threatened to foreclose on grandfather's estate, Lily explained, wiping her nose with a tissue. That estate is where your grandfather's original fermentation vaults are located. If Arthur took it, he would have destroyed the vaults to get the cultures. Sienna went to the opening to negotiate a deal with Christian to keep the estate safe. She was trying to save your legacy, Liam. She was trying to protect you. She took all the blame and the hatred so you could stay safe in the background, away from their greed. She never wanted to hurt you. She was fighting a war alone, trying to shield you from their knives. Lily looked at me with pleading eyes, hoping to see a spark of recognition. I listened to her story in silence. The explanation was tragic, and I could see the pain Sienna had endured. But as I looked at Lily, my expression did not soften. Sienna tried to protect me by making me a ghost, Lily, I said softly, my voice calm but unyielding. She chose to lie, to hide, and to let her doctor feed me sedatives to keep me quiet. She thought she was saving me, but she only helped them bury me alive. I cannot return to that grave. The man who loved her is dead, and the man standing here is a stranger. Tell her to stop searching. The past is dead, Lily, and I am moving forward. I will not go back to being a ghost. I would rather be a living stranger than a dead husband. The damage is done, and my decision is final. I must live my own life now. Lily lowered her head, realizing that the damage was done. The next afternoon, a woman with shoulder-length rich chestnut brown hair and warm hazel eyes walked into the diner. She was wearing a stylish beige trench coat and carrying a notebook. It was Chloe, a highly respected food critic in the metropolis. She was also my former classmate from culinary school, 7 years ago. She took a seat at the corner table, looking around the modest space with curiosity. I recognized her instantly from my memories of my 20th year. Chloe, I said, walking over to her table. She looked up, her eyes widening in absolute shock. Liam? Is that really you? I've been looking for you for years. What happened to you? Why are you here in this diner? You disappeared from the face of the earth, and no one knew where you went. I smiled, a genuine emotion that felt strange on my face. It's me. What can I get for you? Chloe shook her head, still processing the sight of me in a rundown diner. Anything. Cook me whatever you want, Liam. I want to taste your food again. I've missed it so much, and I want to see if you still have that magic. I went back to the kitchen and prepared a special dish, a slow-braised beef short rib glazed with my revived fermentation base, served over a bed of parsnip puree and topped with crispy shallots. The meat was so tender it fell apart under the fork, glistening with a dark, glossy sauce that carried a deep, complex aroma of fermented plums and toasted barley. It was a dish of pure, concentrated passion, cooked with absolute precision. I plated it and served it myself, watching her reaction closely. Chloe took her first bite, and her eyes closed in pure delight. She chewed slowly, savoring the balance of sweet, savory, and deep umami flavors. When she opened her eyes, they were shining with admiration. This is incredible, Liam, she said, her voice filled with emotion. This is the genius I remember from school. The depth of this sauce is unmatched. Why are you cooking in this tiny diner? You should be running the finest kitchen in the city. The entire culinary world should be bowing to you. You are a master of flavor. I remember how you used to talk about starting your own path back in school, before you disappeared into the Carter shadow. I sat down opposite her and explained the situation, the exploitation, the stolen patents, the medical gaslighting, and my determination to build something new. Chloe's hazel eyes flashed with anger as she listened. Christian Knight is a fraud, she said, slamming her notebook onto the table. He has been using your formulas to build his reputation. The Culinary Guild needs to know about this. They must be exposed for what they did. But we need to do it right, strategically. I have a group of private investors who have been looking for a chef with your caliber. We want to open a secret, high-end private dining club called the Iron Kitchen. I will handle the marketing, the critics, and the logistics. You will have complete creative control and 50% of the business. We will show them true genius, Liam. We will tear down their empire together, brick by brick. You deserve to be recognized, not hidden. I looked at Chloe, seeing the warmth and genuine respect in her eyes. Unlike Sienna, who had tried to protect me by hiding me in the dark, Chloe wanted to drag me into the light and stand beside me as an equal. She did not want a ghost, she wanted a partner. "Let's do it," I said, reaching out to shake her hand. Her grip was warm and firm. The partnership was sealed. We would build the iron kitchen in the shadows of the city, and when the time was right, we would expose the Carter Group and Christian Knight for the thieves they were. I finally had someone who believed in my strength, not my weakness, and I felt ready to fight back. We spent the rest of the afternoon outlining our strategy, planning our menu, and preparing for the battle ahead. It felt good to have an ally. The rain was pouring in relentless sheets, drumming a steady, heavy beat against the glass of the diner. It was late, and I was about to turn off the lights and lock the front door. Through the foggy window, I saw a figure standing on the wet cobblestones, soaked to the bone. The streetlights reflected off her wet, golden blonde hair. It was Sienna. She pushed the door open, the wind howling behind her as she stepped inside. Her sapphire blue eyes were red and swollen, and she was shivering violently. "Liam, please," she begged, her voice cracking as she took a step toward the counter. "You have to listen to me. I've been looking everywhere for you. I was so worried about you, Liam. Please don't turn me away like this. I can't bear the silence." I stood behind the counter, my face expressionless. "The diner is closed, Sienna," I said, my voice cold and flat. Sienna shook her head, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, mixing with the rain. "I don't care about the diner, Liam. I have been looking for you everywhere. Lily told me what you said. You have to believe me. I only did it to protect you. My father, he would have destroyed you if he knew you were the one creating those recipes. I had to make him think you were nothing, so he would leave you alone. I sacrificed my own happiness and my own marriage for yours. Please, don't look at me with those cold eyes. It's me, Sienna, the woman who loved you." Sienna stepped closer, her hands reaching out across the counter, desperately trying to touch my bandaged wrists. "I love you, Liam. I never wanted Christian. I never wanted my father's empire. I only wanted to keep you safe. Please, come back with me. We can find a way to fix this. We can run away together. We can leave all of this behind and start fresh. Just the two of us, anywhere you want, far away from this city." She was weeping now, her elegant posture ruined by her grief. She looked like a child begging for a lost toy. But as I looked at her, I felt nothing but a deep, hollow emptiness. Her love felt like a heavy weight that had dragged me down for years, a chain disguised as an embrace that had slowly choked the life out of me. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. "You protected me by making me a ghost, Sienna," I said, my voice cutting through her cries like a knife. "You watched your family doctor feed me sedatives for years. You let me live in a fog, forgetting my own name, my own talent, just so your father could exploit me. You call that protection? You call that love? That is not love, Sienna. That is control. You were just as complicit as your father. You preferred me quiet and broken rather than strong and independent. You wanted a husband you could manage, not a partner who could stand on his own. I will not live in your shadows anymore. You chose the business over our life, and now you have to live with that choice. I am no longer your secret." Sienna's breath caught, her sapphire eyes wide with horror as she realized the depth of my resentment. "I had no choice," she whispered, her voice failing as she backed away toward the exit. I walked over to the door and opened it, pointing out into the dark, rainy night. "I would rather be alive and alone in this tiny diner than a ghost in your luxury penthouse, Sienna. Leave. We are strangers now." Sienna stared at me for a long, agonizing moment, realizing that the husband she had tried to protect was truly gone. She slowly walked out into the rain, and I locked the door behind her. Her cries were drowned by the storm, and I turned back to the warmth of my kitchen, feeling a quiet sense of closure. The rain washed away the last traces of her presence on the pavement, leaving only the cold streets. The following Monday, the Culinary Guild made a major announcement. They were hosting the annual Golden Plate Tournament, the most prestigious cooking competition in the metropolis. The winner would receive the Guild's Golden Seal, which guaranteed global recognition, massive investment, and absolute authority in the culinary world. Christian Knight was announced as the headlining contestant, boasting to the press that he would debut his newly patented heritage fermentation base during the live broadcast. Arthur Carter's stock prices immediately shot back up, fueled by the hype of the upcoming tournament. They were betting everything on this victory, unaware of the storm that was brewing in the shadows of the Old Harbor District. They thought they had secured their future, but they were building on sand. Chloe walked into the diner, holding the official entry forms with a triumphant smile. "I registered the Iron Kitchen under your name, Liam," she said, placing the papers on the counter. "We have been accepted as the wildcard entry. The tournament will be broadcast live across the country. This is our stage. This is where we show the world who the true creator of the fermentation base is. We will expose their lies in front of millions of viewers. We will take back what they stole, and we will do it on national television. Are you ready for this, Liam? This is our moment." I looked at the entry forms, a cold, focused determination settling in my chest. The time for hiding was over. I would step out of the shadows and claim my title, showing them that a genius cannot be kept in a cage. I spent the next week locked in the kitchen of my diner, preparing for the battle. I tested the chemical reactions of my fermentation bases under extreme temperatures, experimenting with different pairings and techniques. Chloe worked tirelessly in the background, securing the high-end ingredients we would need in managing the press interest. She was a constant source of support, her warm presence balancing my cold focus. Unlike my past life where I was kept in the dark, I was now the center of the operation, leading the charge. I was the master of my own kitchen, and I felt alive. The recipes were flowing from my mind like water, each one sharper than the last. I was ready to face them all, and I would not back down. The news of a mysterious wildcard entry from the Old Harbor District began to circulate in the culinary blogs. The media dubbed us the diner in the shadows, wondering who the chef behind the simple name was. Christian Knight, when asked about the wildcard entry in an interview, laughed dismissively. "A diner chef has no place in a guild tournament," Christian said, his slick-back platinum hair gleaming under the studio lights. "They should stick to frying potatoes. This tournament is for masters, not amateurs. They will only embarrass themselves on live television. They don't belong on the same stage as me. They are just trying to get cheap publicity." His arrogance would be his downfall, and I let him dig his own grave. I cooked in silence, letting my prep work speak for me, ignoring their insults. The media loved the drama, but I only cared about the balance of my dishes and the chemistry of the food. I watched his interview on the diner's old television, a quiet smile playing on my lips. Christian Knight had no idea that the amateur he was dismissing was the very man who had written the recipes he was planning to use. He had stolen my formulas, but he did not understand the science behind them. He was a thief running a race in stolen shoes, and I was about to cut the laces. The stage was set, the ingredients were prepped, and the final countdown to the Golden Plate tournament had begun. I would show him what a true master could do when he was no longer under the influence of their drugs. The final act was about to begin, and I would make sure it was spectacular, leaving them with no room to escape their fate. The day of the Golden Plate tournament arrived, filling the grand exhibition hall with blinding television lights, sweeping cameras, and thousands of cheering spectators. The air was thick with the scent of sizzling oil, roasting meats, and nervous sweat. Christian Knight stood at his station, looking smug and arrogant in a white designer chef coat, his slicked-back platinum hair perfect. I stood at my station, wearing a simple black apron over a gray shirt. My messy charcoal black hair was unstyled, but my dark eyes were locked on my ingredients. Chloe watched from the VIP stands, her hazel eyes filled with support. Beside her, Sienna sat next to her father Arthur, looking pale, thin, and absolutely miserable. She knew what was coming, and she could do nothing to stop it. The atmosphere was electric with anticipation, the crowd buzzing as the cameras focused on the contestants. The host's voice boomed over the speakers, announcing the start of the final round. "Contestants, you have 60 minutes to create a master dish. But there is a twist. You must incorporate our wildcard ingredient, fermented wild plums, known for their extreme, volatile acidity." A murmur ran through the crowd. Christian Knight's face went instantly pale. He looked at the wild plums at his station, his hands starting to shake. I watched him from across the hall. I knew exactly why he was panicking. The stolen fermentation base he was using was chemically unstable. When mixed with high acidity, the bacteria would die, turning the entire sauce bitter and metallic. His recipe was a stolen shell, incapable of adapting to surprise ingredients. He was trapped in his own fraud. Christian tried to mask the bitterness by adding cups of sugar and heavy cream to his pot, sweating profusely under the hot stage lights. He was cooking by rote, blindly following a recipe he did not understand. Meanwhile, I remained completely calm. I knew the chemistry of my fermentation base better than anyone. Instead of fighting the plum's acidity, I used it to my advantage. I introduced a small amount of roasted barley to feed the active cultures, using the acidity of the plum to trigger a secondary fermentation stage in my broth. The steam rising from my pot carried a rich, complex aroma that made the judges lean forward in anticipation. My movements were fluid, precise, and confident. I was in my element, cooking with absolute freedom. I knew the victory was mine, and the cooking was a dance of fire and science. "Time is up," the host shouted. The judges tasted Christian's dish first. They took one spoon, and their expressions immediately soured. "It is bitter, overly sweet, and completely unbalanced," the head judge said, pushing the plate away with disgust. Christian stood frozen, his eyes wide in panic as his reputation crumbled in seconds on live television. The judges then moved to my station. They tasted my braised duck with fermented plum broth. The head judge closed his eyes, his face softening. "This is extraordinary," he whispered. "The acidity of the plum is perfectly balanced by a deep, rich umami that I have never tasted before. This is the work of a true genius. A masterpiece that defines a generation. The texture, the balance, everything is flawless. This is a level of cooking that cannot be taught. It is pure art." The crowd erupted into cheers as the judges unanimously declared Liam the winner of the Golden Plate. On the live broadcast, Chloe stepped forward, holding a stack of documents. "Before we present the trophy," Chloe said into the microphone, "we have evidence to present to the Culinary Guild. Christian Knight's heritage base is a stolen formula, patented illegally by Arthur Carter." She handed the laboratory tests and original journals to the guild officials. The hall went silent as the truth was exposed to millions of viewers. The look of horror on Arthur's face was worth more than any trophy. The ghost had returned to claim his name, and the thieves were left with nothing but their own greed. The camera zoomed in on my face, calm and victorious, as the crowd chanted my name. The aftermath of the tournament was swift and merciless. The Culinary Guild officials immediately revoked Christian Knight's license, and police officers stepped onto the stage to arrest him for industrial espionage and corporate theft. Arthur Carter, surrounded by a swarm of reporters, tried to escape the hall, but his investors had already pulled their funding. Within 48 hours, the Carter Culinary Group declared complete bankruptcy, their stocks dropping to zero. The empire they had built on my stolen labor had collapsed like a house of cards. They were ruined, exposed, and disgraced before the entire country. The truth had finally cut through their web of lies, and their names were forever tarnished. They had nothing left, and no one to blame but themselves. The corporate thieves had been dismantled completely. 6 months later, I stood in the dining room of my new restaurant, the Iron Kitchen. The space was elegant and modern, with warm wooden accents and large windows looking out onto the city. The tables were fully booked for the next 3 months, and the reviews had been glowing. Chloe stood beside me, checking the reservation book with a warm smile. She had been there every step of the way, her business mind and support helping me turn my talent into a true legacy. We were partners in every sense of the word, and our success was built on mutual respect and honesty. The future was ours to write, free from the shadows of the past, and I was happy. We were building something beautiful together, one dish at a time. As the staff prepped for the evening service, the front door opened, and a woman stepped inside. It was Sienna. She was no longer wearing designer dresses, she wore a simple wool coat, her golden blonde hair tied back, and her sapphire eyes hollow and tired. She looked around the beautiful restaurant, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Liam," she said, her voice a soft, broken whisper. "I just wanted to see you. I wanted to see what you built. It is beautiful, Liam. You deserve all of this. I am happy for you, even if it hurts to watch. I wanted to apologize one last time for what I did to you. I was blind, and I regret it every day. I should have trusted your strength instead of trying to hide you." I walked over to her, keeping a polite distance. "Sienna," I said, my voice calm and even. She took a step closer, tears forming in her eyes. "My father's company is gone. We lost everything, Liam. But in a way, I feel free. I don't have to pretend anymore. I came to ask if we could start over? Just you and me. We can open a small diner, somewhere quiet, away from the city. I can help you, Liam. Please. I still love you. I never stopped loving you, even when I was hurting you. I was so wrong to make you a ghost. Please give me one more chance to make things right." She looked at me with desperate hope, searching my face for any trace of the husband who had once adored her, hoping to find a spark of forgiveness. I looked at her, and then I looked back at Chloe, who was watching from the counter with a calm, trustful expression. I turned back to Sienna, my eyes clear and untroubled. "We are strangers now, Sienna," I said, my voice polite but cold. "The man who loved you was a ghost created by your family. He died in that kitchen fire. The man standing here is someone else, and he has a new life. I wish you well, but we have nothing more to say to each other. We are strangers, and we will remain that way. Enjoy your dinner." Sienna's hope shattered, and she slowly nodded, her tears falling onto the floor. "I understand," she whispered. She turned and walked out of the restaurant, stepping into the busy city streets. I watched her go, feeling no anger, no regret, and no sadness. The past was gone, and I did not need it anymore. I turned back to the kitchen, where the stoves were hot and the broth was simmering. Chloe walked over and slipped her hand into mine, her grip warm and reassuring. "Are you ready for service, chef?" she asked, smiling. I looked at her, my heart full of peace. "Yes," I said. "Let's begin."